15% of total U.S. beer sales. But while sales of traditional brews have been dropping, craft beer sales continue to rise, suggesting that the future of the U.S. beer market might very well lie in the small breweries popping up in many American cities. In Denver, I'm Mary McCarthy.
And finally tonight, FSN Spotlight. Here's Simon Marks.
On FSN Spotlight today, the campaign for Scottish independence and whether it might finally achieve its goal in just a few weeks' time. If the Scottish National Party has its way, the territory is on the brink of becoming the world's newest nation-state, following in the footsteps of countries like South Sudan, East Timor, and the ex-republics of the former Soviet Union. So what are the chances of Scotland leaving the rest of Britain behind and establishing its own relationships with the rest of the world? The Economist has visited Scotland and found that for many voters, it's a pocketbook question.
On September the 18th, the people of Scotland will vote in a referendum to decide whether to remain within the United Kingdom or whether to take a leap of faith and form an independent country. It's the most important decision that Scots will have made in over 3 centuries. But there are many unanswered questions about the prospect of an independent Scotland. It's not clear what currency the new country would use, whether it could be a member of the European Union, or the wider impact that independence would have on its economy. Scots are hesitant about going solo. Recent opinion polls suggest that 59% will vote to stay within the Union. But this has not deterred the Yes campaign. Driven largely by the Scottish National Party, it's redoubling its efforts to win over poor constituencies like this one in the East End of Glasgow, in the hope of swaying undecided voters. And while the Yes campaign is on the offensive, the Unionist Better Together campaign has been notably absent from these streets.
Sorry, it's hard to find out which way the numbers are going. They're all in shadow.
Mary McCabe is a Yes campaign activist. She's been a proponent of Scottish independence for more than 30 years.
I'm here from Yes Scotland about the referendum. We're going to be having an independence. It's just really one question. If there's a scale of 1 to 10, and 1 is no to independence for Scotland, 10 is yes for independence for Scotland, which number on the scale of 1 to 10 would you please?
I'm not taking any part in it.
You're not going to vote at all? No?
I've got no enough about it, so I'm no...
Right, well, I mean, I've got leaflets and things.
I'm alright, cheers anyway.
Right, okay. What more people ask about is, are we too poor? They still have this thing in their heads, what we call the WPS syndrome, too wee, too poor, too stupid, which we say down the decades we've been told that we are too wee, too poor and too stupid to run our own affairs. So people do ask, do we have the money? Is it all about oil? Because it's been presented as if it's all about oil. This badge is over 30 years old. It's a badge I wore at the 1979 devolution referendum. And I wear it to remind myself that the same people told the same lies and threats then.
Shettleston, a district in the East End of Glasgow, is one of Britain's poorest areas. Male life expectancy here is 63. That's 14 years lower than the UK national average, and one of the worst levels in the European Union.
Places like the East End of Glasgow, you know, they're the kind of places where the message that we're somehow better together doesn't really resonate. You've only got to go a kind of stone's throw from here, and you'll find kind of massive levels of poverty and inequality. The reality is that we live in Scotland, a country that has 59 MPs. Only one of those MPs is a Conservative, yet we've got a Conservative Prime Minister. How does that work?
At core is the issue of whether people would be better off economically in or out of the Union. In one poll, over half of respondents said that they would vote for either side if it made them richer by £500 a year. The SNP claims that each Scot would be £1,000 richer in an independent Scotland. But on the other hand, the Unionist Better Together campaign says that Scots will be £1,400 better off if they stick with Britain. Those kinds of figures hold a lot of sway with voters here.
What would be your main concern?
My more money in my pocket, as I said. That's my main concern, to keep me going, because I'm a widow and I stay myself, so more money and I would maybe get on a wee bit better. You understand, you know?
Well, I think I'm going to vote no.
You're going to vote no. That's fine. Is there anything particular about you're voting yes in the referendum? Or?
Well, if things fell flat in their face, we end up.
You'll be voting yes. That's fine. And is everybody else in the household of the kind of same opinion? Or? Aye.
The separatist fiscal promises are based on an expectation that an independent Scotland would earn revenues from North Sea oil of around £7 billion a year by 2018. The Independent Office for Budget Responsibility thinks otherwise. It says that revenue from oil taxes will be less than half of that for this period. Currently, Scots receive 15% more per head in public funding than the rest of Britain. The Yes campaign offers a dream of a richer, independent Scotland. However, its rosy projections about oil revenue cannot be relied upon. Add to this Scotland's ageing population and a National Party intent on overspending, it seems, and the economic reality of an independent Scotland becomes progressively bleaker. But the Yes campaigners soldier on. They're buoyed with great hope that they can win this referendum and take Scotland solo.
Right, 1, 2, smile. Yay! Right.
That doesn't look probable, but it's not impossible.
There's more on the battle over Scotland's future in the latest edition of The Economist, both in print and online at economist.com. And FSN is planning extensive coverage of the Scottish referendum in September. You'll hear that on this very programme, FSN Reports. With FSN Spotlight, I'm Simon Marks.
And that's the Monday edition of FSN Reports. Remember, if you'd like to get in touch, you can email us, reports@featurestory.com, and follow us on Twitter @FeatureStory. But for now, I'm Kevin McAleese in Washington, alongside Rebecca Foster on the Bulletin Desk. For everyone with FSN Everywhere, have a great evening. Goodbye.
WMPG is on the air thanks to listener donations and generous support from the University of Southern Maine. USM educates Maine's future artists, business people, engineers, healthcare professionals, lawyers, managers, public servants, scientists, and teachers. More information is available at usm.maine.edu. WMPG is grateful for support from our listeners and from USM's professional development programs. USM offers workshops and certificate programs to help individuals develop career-building skills in key areas such as human resources, Lean Six Sigma, project management, supervision, and grant writing. USM also offers GRE and GMAT test prep courses. Details and course listings can be found at usm.maine.edu/pdp.
Blunt wishes to thank the following sponsors and partners: the A.R. Gould School at Long Creek Youth Development Center, Terrascope Youth Radio at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, Youth Radio from Youth Media International in Oakland, California, the Fetzer Institute, and Blunt also wishes to thank Ari Epstein from Massachusetts, Mike Tipping from Maine, Sam Ross from Massachusetts, Gibson Fay LeBlanc from Maine, Matthew Osman from Maine, Bonnie Blythe from Maine, Karen Garis-Gadowski from Maine, John Bazile from California, Erica Kramer from New Mexico, Susanna Rosenfield from New York, Shira LaBelle from Maine, Jason Reed from Maine, Molly Haley from Maine, Carla McGarvey from Washington, D.C., Emily Ayub from New York, Sarah Buckingham from Ohio, Dale Robin Goodman from Maine, Dan Kramer from California, and Katie Flood from Florida. The views expressed on Blunt are not necessarily those of WMPG or USM management. Blunt welcomes opposing views.
Right down to earth, in a language that everybody here can understand.
I got to talk. I gotta tell what I'm saying. I gotta talk about my life as I see it.
So let me be clear, and make no mistake.
You are
listening to Blunt.
Newsreaders, politicians, teachers, lecturers. We are.
Everyone knows the term pothead. Most people even know a pothead or frequent marijuana user.
But do we know about marijuana on a deeper level? Tonight on Blunt Youth Radio, we're discussing marijuana and marijuana use. I'm Elena Drummond.
And I'm Aiden Carter. and you're listening to Blunt Youth Radio, award-winning youth radio produced media live on the air since 1994.
You can also join us by calling 207-780-4909, and do check out our blog at bluntradio.org. Tonight we will be talking with Sarah Goldberg, who is utilizing the 12-step program at our local community center, recovering from marijuana addiction. And also, Alan St. Pierre is the executive director at the Normal Foundation, which is a nonprofit organization that strives to legalize the responsible usage of marijuana by adults and to serve as an advocate for consumers to assure that they have access to high-quality marijuana that is safe, convenient, and affordable. We will also be talking to Morgan Fox for a short time, and he is the communications manager at the Marijuana Policy Project, also known as MPP, which works towards changing policies and laws that concern marijuana prohibition. So, I'd like to direct the first question to Sarah Goldberg, and I'd like to ask you how addiction has affected you.
Right. Well, I'd like to start by saying thank you for having me on the show. And addiction affects me, the way I think it affects many addicts. We start feeling kind of out of the loop, out of sorts compared to the rest of society. There's something about us that just is not right compared to quote-unquote normal society. And because of that, we utilize what is around us that makes us feel somewhat more comfortable, even if that comfortability is seen as out of the norm or just not, to be blunt, right. And we use this for comfort. We use it to feel better about ourselves and to get a connection and a safety that we might have not had before regarding previous history in our life.
What do you think launches people into addiction?
Well, I know for me it was a lot of feeling unstable, uncomfortable, even coming from a really stable home, public school life. A lot of addicts will admit that, just being in a social setting with other children did not feel safe, did not feel, comfortable. Because of this, we will utilize what feels safe, comfortable. And because of this, my direction went to things that were illegal, went to things that, were not seen as normal, and that was primarily marijuana.
Mm-hmm. What is your opinion on the legalization of marijuana in Maine?
I'm absolutely for it, to be honest. Just because it didn't work for me doesn't mean it doesn't work for other people who find it useful. People who use it medicinally, I absolutely support. People who use it to relax, I don't think it's any different than, coming home at the end of the day and having a glass of wine or a glass of liquor. I think it's perfectly safe and healthy when used safely.
Where do you think the line is between responsible usage and abuse? Because there is a line, and
Absolutely.
There's a point.
Yeah, I can definitely use myself as an example. Using safely means using without hurting others. Using safely means you are not doing things that are dangerous to yourself and others. My use consisted of a daily abuse. If I was not high, I had to be high. My obsession was around getting high. I don't consider myself in, definition of a junkie, but absolutely I needed marijuana to keep going through the day. Now, there's a difference between that and there's a difference between someone just simply needing to unwind, enjoy some time with their friends and family, or just have a simple, good time, in my opinion.
Right. How do you think that recreational marijuana became no big deal in the lives of many people? Because I know that sometimes when I'm in the hallways of my high school, I hear people just talking about it in a very casual fashion.
Right. I think you can definitely attribute that to, I don't want to sound too crazy here, but media. Right. I think media is a big part of this. I think the stigma around drugs is not something that it once was. I think marijuana has been proven to not be detrimental to health or longevity of life. It is not, in my opinion, dangerous or deadly, say, as heroin, crack cocaine. It is a safe, usable drug. I honestly feel that any stigma around it is based on something that, is just not true. Honestly, When it comes to children using it, yes, I am against that. I think there should be regulations and laws put around it, just like on booze. That's my opinion.
I'd like to direct to a quote here that says, it was by Ruth Marcus, and she said, a third of 12th graders who live in the states with medical marijuana and who have used the drug in the past year report that one source is another person's prescription, and another 6% have their own pharmacy. Now, do you think that by the legalizing marijuana in Maine, that is going, like the usage of, I guess, marijuana in teens and adolescents will increase?
Based on the stigma around it, I think there will be an ability to talk about it more intelligently. In that regards, realizing that, yes, children should not be using this habitually. There is, an age, I do believe, where experimentation is perfectly okay, but that is something that has to be, safely and, smartly used. But as far as the fear that this will become some level of an epidemic where kids are just going to use it because it is legalized, I mean, I don't think there is any difference. If it is safely regulated, it will be no different than kids who get access to alcohol.
Right. I'd like to welcome to the show Morgan Fox and Alan St. Pierre. To recall, Alan St. Pierre is the executive director at NORML, and Morgan Fox works at MPP, also known as the Marijuana Policy Project. Morgan and Alan, are you there? All right, apparently not for now. So, why do you think that marijuana should be legalized in Maine?
Why should marijuana be...
Oh, hello?
Well, the bottom line is that marijuana prohibition is a failed experiment. We're arresting hundreds of thousands of people every year for using something that's demonstrably safer than alcohol at great expense, both in terms of human cost and in terms of financial cost. And by Maine making marijuana legal for adults, we're going to be able to better separate it from teens. We'll be able to keep it out of the hands of criminals and have this market for a popular commodity be controlled by legitimate businesses.
Right. Why do you think that marijuana is made illegal in the first place?
Well, there's a really long history about that, but primarily most drugs have been made illegal because of racial reasons. In order to penalize racial groups that certain types of drugs are popular among, the drugs themselves are made illegal. And it makes it a lot easier to strip away people's civil liberties when you criminalize a behavior that is popular.
Any comments, Sarah Goldberg?
I mean, I absolutely agree what is being said. There is a lot of stigma, how the habitual use of marijuana has entered society. I see what he's saying about that. I have no complaint on that. I think it's absolutely true. I can also add, things that you hear on a regular about, stigma around marijuana, how, Hearst, in his paper mills, hemp is a great product, and it was a threat to Hearst, and, just so on and so forth. They had to put a stigma around that so his business would not get crushed by the hemp industry.
The states are taking the lead because they're wary of locking up thousands of their own citizens for possessing a substance that is less potential for abuse and destructive behavior than alcohol. That's David Firestone from the New York Times. Like you just said, Mr. St. Pierre, that's pretty much like what sums it up. So could we talk a little bit more to the cost of prosecuting and locking up marijuana users?
Well, the total budget annually for marijuana prohibition, I believe, is somewhere around $8.7 billion. And it's been estimated that by reducing those costs, by making marijuana legal, we would be able to not only save that money, but also make an additional to $8.7 billion in revenue. And that's not even considering the implications for job creation. In terms of individual arrests, I think it's, much more concerning what the cost is to the person that's being arrested. I mean, a simple arrest for marijuana can haunt you for years, making it more difficult to find employment, to get educational loans. It can even affect housing. This is not something we should be doing to responsible users for a substance that's safer than alcohol.
Right. Sarah Goldberg, any comment?
Oh, 100%. He's absolutely right. Putting people who are marijuana users in jail is just, in my opinion, stupid. To be blunt, I apologize.
I mean, you said before creating jobs, and I want to ask, do you think that by legalizing marijuana and regulating it, it would be an economic boost?
Absolutely. I mean, when people think about making marijuana legal, a lot of times they get trapped in this mindset that is somehow that the marijuana market doesn't currently exist. But this market is already there. It's just being controlled by criminals. If we take it out of their hands and put it into the hands of regulated, licensed business owners who have incentives to follow the rules, it's going to move all of the employment from the illicit market and the criminal underworld into the legal world, making it a lot easier for people to work in this industry without facing stigma or fear of arrest.
We were talking before also. I want to ask the same question again now that we have Alan St. Pierre on the line. How did recreational marijuana become no big deal? Or quote-unquote no big deal in the daily lives of many people?
1960s started to be used by the white middle class, and the numbers start rising ever more. Today, I submit there's about 5 reasons that marijuana is as politically viable as it is, where it was not 5, 10, 15 years ago. And that is 1, baby boomers. Baby boomers are taking over in politics, and they have a primary or secondary experience with marijuana that, say, my grandparents did not, and they sort of represented the reefer madness generation. The second reason is that the economic recession in the United States, which is about 7 to 8 years old, is still pretty pronounced at the local and state level. And those baby boomers that are now running those municipalities and states, again, they can't see arresting, prosecuting, and potentially incarcerating people on marijuana charges as a good use of tax dollars, a good use of police time. Third is medical marijuana. What you can see from the Gallup polling that begins in the 60s, when NORML was founded in 1970, about 8% of the public supported legalization. Today, it's just shy of 60% of the public supports legalization. And one of the first really big upward ticks in the curve begins right after California, that little nation state where 1 out of 7 Americans live, voted in 96 for medical marijuana. Start to see the big increase in general support for legalization ramp up from that point forward. The fourth reason is the internet. The fact that people can now communicate directly with each other. NORML and the other drug policy reform groups have millions of people involved with these opt-in networks. People can now go to federal repositories like PubMed.gov and look up 22,000+ marijuana-related studies that when I was a 15-year-old or 20-year-old, you had to go to a sophisticated research library and pay 25 cents a page to copy it. So today, of course, through the internet, people can pull down thousands and thousands of pages of information, and they can make up their own mind regarding the extreme safety as compared to other drugs that marijuana has. And the fifth and most subjective reason is that as Americans, after 80 years of marijuana prohibition, we're just sick of it. If alcohol prohibition is thought of as the great failed social experiment, and it lasted about 13 years, this thing has lasted 78 years. About 26 million people have been arrested on marijuana charges, 90% for possession only. There's about 80 to 120,000 people in jail on marijuana charges only. In fact, we even track people, about a dozen men who have lifetime sentences at a webpage called lifeforpot.org, where these men are serving lifetime sentences for cultivating or selling large amounts of marijuana where there's no violence involved. So it's taken a long time. There are many groups, Marijuana Policy Project, Americans for Safe Access, Vote Hemp, and dozens of others along with NORML that are now working to reform these laws.
Mm-hmm. Now, there's a lot of concern surrounding marijuana legalization, and that lobbyists will get to make the regulations, as you were saying before, taking that revenue out of sort of the criminals' hands and putting it into regular businessmen's hands, so that they can provide jobs for citizens and such. And so what we're wondering is, how can we have a grassroots approach?
Well, I mean, certainly for the large part, Normal is a grassroots organization that gets supported by people who donate, $15, $20, $30, as much as they can get a Normal T-shirt as anything. So the effort to change America's hearts and minds regarding marijuana truly has been a grassroots effort now for 43 years in the United States. We're just now getting to the point where, along with other lobbyists like Morgan and myself who work for nonprofit organizations, there are now business lobbyists in Washington and the state capitals that work for individual marijuana companies or their trade associations. And that seems like a logical maturation of all this. And I think generally we're all happy to be working together towards ending prohibition.
All right, thank you. Also remind us that we're talking with Sarah Goldberg and Alan St. Pierre at the moment. Alan St. Pierre is Executive Director at Normal, and Sarah Goldberg is utilizing the 12-step program at the local community center in recovery for marijuana addiction. Sarah, what are your comments?
It's, as far as a grassroots movement, absolutely. I mean, just based on the fact that it is spreading like wildfire on the internet alone proves this, because the internet right now is our greatest resource for immediate news and intelligent opinion, amongst other things, of course. But that is my opinion of the internet. It is a great resource for these things, and the fact that it is one of the most searched things on search engines such as Google really says something about it and the grassroots movement. And I do believe very much so that once regulated, taxed, and grown, it will give jobs and really boost the economy in a way that is absolutely necessary, in my opinion.
Would you say that the revolution, like you're saying, is inevitable?
At this point, I think there's enough pro-pot people out there to really understand that, this is something that will either happen or continue to exacerbate the underground drug ring. It's either A or B. Yes, our underground black market will find other ways to profit, and that is a shame. But if we can take marijuana out of their hands, we are doing something vital.
Right.
So, for the majority of the show so far, we've talked about really essentially all the upsides and how we could benefit from marijuana legalization. But what I'm curious is, what are some of the downsides of having marijuana legalized in Maine and in the States?
Absolutely.
Because we have all of these pro-marijuana movements, but nobody's really pitching these arguments saying that these things are actually going to hurt us more than we're actually going to gain. Mm-hmm. So could you speak to that a little bit?
I mean, one thing I can definitely say, and I'm going to use some 12-step jargon if that's appropriate, is something that addicts can relate to is something we call a spiritual malady. And what that means is we have inherited, just from the basis of being human, the fact that once we take on something that disassociates us from the rest of society in a negative or positive way, we will utilize it to the best of our ability, and consistently it will become an unhealthy pattern. And that is something entirely to be concerned about in the hands of children, just like alcohol or any other negative substance for a child. It needs to be regulated. It needs to be watched. Parents should not just be letting their 2-year-old smoke a blunt. There needs to be laws around this. There needs to be regulations. I cannot stress that enough, because otherwise we will have children who will use this and find it a reason to expand their usage in other things. I do agree on some level the term gateway drug is appropriate, not for people who can use it responsibly, but for people, in my case, who are already looking for an outlet to use, abuse, and be inappropriate, so I can feel safe and comfortable in myself regardless of anyone else in my life.
Mm-hmm. Now, could you also speak to that, Mr. St. Pierre?
Well, there's certainly all kinds of concerns that are just sort of generally wrought from a big change in public policy, from something, and this is pretty dramatic. There aren't many things in people's lives where they're going to see something go from being illegal to legal. Now, I'm almost 50 years old, so I would suggest I've seen gay marriage and gay rights in the United States. If you'd asked me 20 years ago would people get married in the United States who are gay, I would have said that's legally unlikely. Well, of course, that's entirely wrong today. And there's a Brookings Institute paper that was written last June by E.J. Dion and Bill Galston that do a comprehensive analysis of American demographics. And this is just like gay marriage sort of baked in the cake. If you're over 70 years old, there's a good chance you might not culturally relate to this. But if you're below that age, and every generation after that increasingly wants to see marijuana legalized. So some of the downsides that I would suggest that could be wrought from this, as Sarah's demonstrated, that if more products are made available and they are advertised, and I stress advertised is a big fulcrum here that this rests upon, if there's more access and there's more glamorization around a product that alters people's consciousness, in general, this is not a good thing. But acknowledging here, apparently everybody does, that prohibition doesn't really work and doesn't stop people from engaging in that behavior, then by having it legalized, we have much better ability through peer pressure to check bad behavior. We have the ability to have social mores and values that are more normative regarding our environment. So in a place like, there's only, I could name you 3 places in the entire United States where the mores and values are such that, hey, it's okay, we're so lax to party that you can open a can of beer and walk down the street with it. Key West, Bourbon Street, and 6th Street in Austin. This is a huge country, and to think that only 3 little parts of streets in 3 little unique towns allow alcohol and otherwise legal and lawful product to be open and walk down the street with it. So that, I think, marijuana will be very, very similar. Only the most remarkably bohemian and liberal places are going to allow marijuana to be used in the open manner. Otherwise, it will largely be behind closed doors. I think the other thing, too, that comes out of legalization is now that marijuana can be consumed in ways other than just smoked. Eating cannabis is decidedly different than smoking it, or even, for that matter, vaping it. And marijuana now is being converted into other forms beyond hash, which was always a natural but more potent form of marijuana. But today's concentrates that are superheated through butane create a much more potent product. And so with legalization, we need to be very mindful about the delivery systems, potency, but I think, again, regulation and control and taxation do a much better job of that than cops and robbers trying to catch people coming across the border, which apparently doesn't work.
All right, thank you for that. So, I mean, yeah, I, for one, I don't really support the pro-legalization thing. I mean, it's either like one thing or the other. It's either going to become legalized or it's not. And, I mean, if we're going to be spending all our resources trying to crack down on something that's inevitable, that's going to happen regardless of our police forces trying to prohibit it, I mean, we may as well just make it legal so that we don't have to deal with that and we can focus on the greater issues at hand, because we're essentially wasting our money and our time and our people trying to do this. And sort of coming from like a teenage perspective, you know, I've seen the way it affects a lot of people throughout, I guess, my high school and stuff, because there's a lot of people who just use it without really thinking about the effects of how it's going to alter maybe their lives. So now I'd like to take the opportunity to introduce, we have a phone guest, Claire from South Portland.
Hello?
Hi, I just want to say that I'm just really not looking forward to pot being legalized. I'm sure it will be, and I think it being criminalized is wrong. But I think we need to have a go-slow approach because, it's a psychoactive substance. I mean, I know people who struggle with addiction around it, go to very dark and negative places, and I want to know. I mean, young people young people can be really badly affected by it, and use is going to increase when it gets legalized. And I feel like the people who want to legalize, it's all about how it just should be. Well, I mean, I think we need to really think carefully. I don't want to just pass it okay, now it's legal, and then let the lobbyists and the people who have a vested interest decide what the regulations are going to be. Because that's what happens. The lobbyists write the rules, and they donate to the candidates, and then that gets to be the law. And I think it really needs to be something where people have more of a chance to slow this down. I want to know. I don't want to pass something unless it tells me in advance how we're going to protect young people more. I want to hear that in advance. I don't want that decided after it's legalized. Like in Colorado, they're already having the problem with the advertising has no controls on it, and they can advertise stuff that's attractive to teenagers. That's not okay. And I feel like it's made out to be like the real problem is just that it's illegal, and once it's legal, everything's going to be fine. I'm not sure that's true. I think that criminalization has enough problems that we may have to look at legalization, but it's not because things are going to be fine when it's legalized. Things are not going to be fine when it's legalized. It's just going to be the start of a whole set of problems that we're going to have to face by themselves. Different problems than we have now. Maybe, we'll get rid of some worse problems like the problems of drug cartels and so forth. But I'm just, it's made out to be just so rosy. Let's just hurry up and legalize. It's not that simple. I'm going to listen to the response.
And here's the response. Sarah Goldberg, you look like you wanted to have something. You had something to say.
Oh, sure. Well, I just want to say to Claire, thank you for your opinion. I think it's absolutely valid. I would just like to put forward, yes, again, this needs to be regulated. There needs to be serious discussion, considering the fact that this will be in the hands of children, no matter if there is an age limit, if there is a 21 or 18 age limit for, the use and the purchase of marijuana. I would just like to input, not that this makes it any better, that when it comes to the advertising of things like alcohol, cigarettes, there has never been a cease in the past, and even currently, to advertise to young children. I see even in local supermarkets alcohol being advertised in juice boxes and colorful sodas. I mean, if that's not for children, I don't know what is. As well with cigarettes, I mean, not currently to the level, you can find it in magazines, but thinking back to, the 1950s, 60s, where you'd see a commercial with Fred Flintstone smoking a cigarette, how is that not advertising to children? So I absolutely respect what Claire is saying, and I see where she is coming from. But if we are going to be concerned about advertising marijuana, we have to also realize that this is no different from what we have been doing with alcohol and cigarettes.
Alan St. Pierre, do you have comments on Claire's statements?
Well, hers are completely legitimate concerns that any parent would bring to the discussion, no doubt. The mothers of Colorado and Washington had to weigh these issues, and the postmortem that we did on the data on who voted for this and why, it's clear. If women in America do not want marijuana legalized, it will not be legalized. So reformers have to convince the Claires of the world that prohibition doesn't make raising children easier. I think acknowledged here that this is not a panacea by any means. I give about 40 lectures a year to colleges, a lot with graduate and law school students who are over 21, and I ask them, how many of you drank alcohol illegally before you turned 21? And about 90 to 95% of the hands go up. So nobody's arguing that we make alcohol illegal again because teenagers illegally access alcohol. In the end, we are talking about use versus abuse for adults, and we can use mores and values that are pretty well existing regarding what does use mean and what does irresponsible use look like, and what's really the logical punishments and deterrence. I mean, it's one thing to catch somebody in a DUI situation, drunk driving, and to take away their license, give them points on their insurance, and maybe make them spend a weekend in jail. It's a lot different than putting them in jail for 10 years, taking away all their assets, and removing them from their family. Because that's what happens if you're caught growing a couple marijuana plants in this country in a number of states. So and a really other last important point that I always try to make clear to any mother who is not yet convinced that it is better to have marijuana sold through regulated, controlled venues that have liability. And that is this. The data is clear. Every year in this country, over 1 million children sell marijuana, largely to other children. And anybody who wants prohibition to remain in place is going to make it so that that's the environment our 12 to 17-year-olds are going to find themselves forevermore, with millions of kids selling marijuana. So this may be a Hobson's choice in some people's minds, a lesser of evils, but from alcohol prohibition, we have well learned that it is better to control these substances than to turn them over to syndicates and to have the education about using them coming from the street and not from our parents and not from society that condones responsible use, not irresponsible use.
And I think that leads us right to our break right now. We've been talking about marijuana with Sarah Goldberg and Alan St. Pierre, and we'll be right back after a break. Thank you for listening. And now the weather. Tonight, late afternoon. Tonight, a 40% chance of showers and thunderstorms before midnight. Some of the storms could be severe. South wind around 10 miles per hour. New rainfall amounts between 1/10 and 1/4 of an inch, except higher amounts possible in thunderstorms. Tuesday, areas of fog before 9 a.m. Otherwise, mostly sunny, with a high near 75. West wind 5 to 10 miles per hour. Tuesday night, mostly clear with a low around 57. South wind around 5 miles per hour, becoming calm in the evening. Wednesday, sunny with a high near 76. Tuesday wind, northeast wind 5 to 10 miles per hour, becoming southeast in the afternoon. Wednesday night, partly cloudy with a low around 59. Thursday, mostly sunny with a high near 79. Thursday night, partly cloudy with a low around 61. You are listening to WMPG and W281AC. Gorham, Portland.
Right.
All right, welcome back to Blunt Youth Radio. You're listening to The Marijuana Show. I'm hosting this with Milena German. My name is Aiden Carter. Blunt's phone number is 780-4909.
Call in
in
with a
the
question
studio,
or comment.
we have Sarah Goldberg with us. She is currently utilizing the 12-step program at a local community center. She's in recovery from marijuana addiction. And we also have on the phone Alan St. Pierre, who is the executive director for NORML, or NORML, the National Organization for the Reform for Marijuana Legalization. So for the second segment of the show, we'd like to focus a little more on the health issues, or at least for this part. So what are some health complications that have derived from the usage of marijuana, and some things that it could pose, especially over like the long-term usage of it, and some sort of, I guess, the setbacks of using it, because like you said, you can have addictions to it. It becomes a habitual thing over time. So could you speak to that a little bit?
Of course. I mean, the two things health-wise I must, insist upon is the fact that my physical and emotional health deteriorated very rapidly. I was a habitual to addicted marijuana smoker for the past 10 years, from age 18 to 28. I'm going to be 29 September. Little plug there. But I'm going to start with the physical repercussions of my consistent use, and that started with consistent coughing, hacking, throwing up. You know, we often talk about marijuana giving you the munchies. It actually caused significant weight gain in me because of this. Things like being very lethargic, not wanting to do anything active. These again were inherent spiritual maladies in me, but because of the effect of marijuana in me, I became a literal mole in the dark. Things such as skin pigment decreased. I became lighter in skin tone, and going out in the sun became more dangerous for me. Mostly, I have to say, and I hate to be blunt, the gross stuff I was hacking up on a consistent basis was pretty nasty. As far as emotional health, pardon me, I have to say I developed paranoia and egomania very quickly. My emotional health was on the brink of being a disaster. There are many times I probably should have been admitted into a psych ward. I was suicidal. I was certain at a point in my life, I think around 2021, that my landlord at the time had implanted, cameras and videos, recorders in my apartment. I was certain that I was being spied on consistently. I was sure that at a point, and people in my fellowship have heard me say this many times, I had megalomania, which meant that I was pretty consistently convinced that I was either the second coming of Christ or the Antichrist, and that is very embarrassing to admit, but it is the truth. I had psychological issues regarding marijuana.
Alan St. Pierre, any comments?
Well, as somebody who's used marijuana longer than Ms. Goldberg's been alive, I can't report any of those. The only thing I'm paranoid about is getting busted and being ill-affected by prohibition. I'm underweight. I have a higher average IQ. I'm well socialized. I sleep well. I eat well. I stay away from fatty foods, sugary, salty foods. So, yes, when individuals have a reaction such as you've described, I can see why marijuana might not be for you. But in general, considering that about 1 out of 7 Americans use marijuana in the United States, despite its illegality, and the fact that humans have been using it for thousands and thousands of years, there are 22,000 studies on marijuana that people can look up online to determine whether or not it is a reasonably safe and, in fact, non-toxic. It has what's called an LD50 rating, meaning that science has never measured its lethal dose. So from a pharmacological point of view, it has to be discussed firstly as not harmless, no drug is, but just about as feckless as a drug that humans interact with. It does not generally, is not acknowledged to cause physical withdrawal or cravings like heroin, caffeine, cocaine, barbiturates, amphetamines. Those cause serious physical withdrawal and cravings in individuals doing things to achieve their high that make it so that they are, in many cases, not living the lives they want to. So that usually isn't the experience of the average marijuana consumer at all, frankly. And then just to put it into sort of blunt terms, since we're on Blunt News Radio, is that there are 5 people in the United States still living who get 300 pre-rolled marijuana cigarettes a month shipped to them, paid for by you and me. They're in something called the Compassionate IND program, which stands for, ironically, the Investigative New Drug Program. Many of them have been in the program since the late 1970s. They smoke, because these joints weigh about 0.08 grams, they smoke between 8 and 10 ounces of marijuana a month. So one would think that these would be unbelievable guinea pigs to find out, well, if you smoke that much marijuana and your name is not Snoop Dogg, how is it that what would happen to your body if you smoked that much marijuana over a 30-year period? And I know all these individuals who use marijuana, that the federal government allows them to get it, and ask them, haven't the government ever put you through any tests, like for your, major systems? And they're like, no, they just ship us the marijuana. So we advocates, people who use marijuana and know how it affects our bodies, paid for them to go to the University of Montana at Missoula, where a doctor named Ethan Russo put them through the rigors of morphological, respiratory, pulmonary, cognitive, etc. Put them through all of the cases that you would want to know if someone smoked that much marijuana, what the heck did it do to their body and mind? And this can be looked up online and you can read it in detail. But in some, as described by Ms. Goldberg, if you smoke a lot of marijuana, you can develop what's called pre-bronchial wheeze, the development of excess amounts of mucus. You can also develop, in many cases, only measurably short-term memory loss, meaning like when you're under the influence of the drug immediately, you have short-term memory loss, but then again, that's the same influence that one has when one uses alcohol. So that shouldn't be a reason to ban the product necessarily. And all the other studies were basically clean. Respiratory, for the most part, pulmonary, cognitive. People who've been using marijuana for 35 years had the same degree of memory recall in the long term than people who didn't use marijuana at all. So it's not a harmless drug, but compared to almost all other drugs that humans interface with, as the DEA's own chief administrative law judge ruled at Normal versus DEA, marijuana is the safest therapeutic active substance known to man.
You said before our break, we talked about age and how it affects youth specifically. But I also want to talk about, I know from experience just in daily life, and I think everybody does, when they go over to a friend's house or anybody's house, they have a liquor cabinet or something like that, or it pretty much out there, like alcohol in general. Is there, I'm going to direct this question first to Sarah Goldberg, but is there a way that we can realistically make marijuana safer if it is suddenly in everyone's homes?
Oof. That's a tough question for sure, because what do we do nowadays with alcohol? We lock it up in liquor cabinets, and, the kids are crafty. They'll figure out a way to break that lock. Really, what it comes down to is safe and important dialogue between a parent and a child regarding the use and recreational use of things such as marijuana and alcohol. And basically the most important thing I heard before making my rash, irresponsible decisions that I still agree with is the fact that it is safe for adults, it is not safe for children. Let your brain develop first, because our brains, up until the age of our early 20s, are still developing. And if we abuse marijuana, it will exacerbate the development. I completely believe that Alan is a responsible user of marijuana, and I happen to not be a responsible user. There are a lot of people out there, unfortunately, who will use drugs with a sick mind, and that is not an insulting term I am using. A sick mind is something me and a lot of my fellowship understand that we do deal with. We have sick minds. It is what it is.
Alan St. Pierre, any comment?
Specific to how to make it safer when it's legal, and is this for adults or for children?
For children.
Yes,
I guess.
So definitely developing laws and liabilities regarding where marijuana can be kept and under what circumstances seems rather logical. I think that developing packaging and labeling that makes it so that in time kids understand what is and is not for them, because there's been some fascinating social experiments done in places like Colorado where children who are between 5 and 8 years old have been had the tobacco and cigar and cigarello cases along with liquor bottles and beer bottles put in front of them as juxtaposed to other types of drinks that are available, juices, sodas, milk, water products, and they can discern the difference between adult drinks and kid drinks. But if you go out to some of these stores in Colorado, and notably in a place like California, you can see that these products, whether they're gummy bears or chocolate candy bars or lozenges, it all looks like candy. And so when they open up these packages that are dosed and compare them with products that they've gone to the local 7-Eleven, if you will, and purchased similar types of products and open them, children can't tell the difference. And that can't be a good thing. So I've suggested, maybe in the future, if you're going to legally be able to sell a marijuana edible, maybe it has to be crimson red. Red, red, red. And so in less than a generation or so, we should be able to teach children that if you open a package of candy-looking substance and it's red like this or in a certain shape, that would be a visual cue that this is not for you.
So you're saying we should regulate pot before it's legalized, like we need to sort of set these laws and prohibitions and try to figure out exactly where we should sort of focus our way. I'm sorry. In order to keep youth from using it, we should set these regulations before legalizing it, instead of after it's legalized and put into the lobbyists' hands, who are taking these businesses and making the money off of the distribution and legalization of marijuana. How can we sort of prevent that from happening versus having regulations set up before we actually legalize this drug?
Sure. Well, the pox should be on the House of Legislators who have failed to end cannabis prohibition laws. Most laws in the United States that have changed regarding marijuana have happened because pure democracy. People have been asked to vote yes or no. Do you want to either have medical marijuana? Do you want to have legalization? That was certainly the case in the state of Maine in 1998, if I'm not incorrect, or 2000 when Maine voters voted for medical marijuana. By the way, it was Maine legislators back in the 1970s who passed decriminalized laws. So Maine has an interesting amalgam of laws that have come about from two different mechanisms within our democracy. Only 23 states allow for direct initiatives. Most of those states happen to be west of the Mississippi, and they use them quite a bit. California governs themselves amazingly, and much to my chagrin, because I grew up in New England. I believe in the town hall meeting, frankly, is an excellent way of Norman Rockwell-like democracy, but you don't get that in places like Los Angeles and Seattle. They largely use initiatives. So the fact that citizens had to go out and change the laws because our legislators were so recalcitrant, I don't think reformers can be blamed for this. And then later, that those same legislators who never wanted to pass these reform laws are stuck having to come up with new regulatory schemes is really a function of their abandoning their responsibility to create good public policy. Prohibition is bad public policy. So, in the end, as I mentioned earlier, if women, notably mothers, do not want marijuana law reform, it will not happen. And when marijuana law reform does happen, mothers have the loudest voice on what it's going to look like.
So sort of circling back to what we were saying before when you guys were both talking about your experiences with marijuana, we saw very huge contrasts in what you were both saying as your experiences. Sarah, you were saying that you had a lot of struggles with your usage of marijuana, and it made you feel a lot of negative things after long-term usage besides what it actually sort of you used it to benefit yourself for, whereas you, Mr. St. Pierre, we heard that you had really no difficulties with it whatsoever. So what I'm curious is what it is that sort of makes these giant contrasts, and is there something that defines some sort of like usage, or is there some sort of prescription or for each individual person? Because not every person is the same, as we've heard from both of you. So what sort of, I don't know, what regulations can we have against people using certain amounts of marijuana and sort of protecting themselves from harm by knowing what they're capable of handling? Because there seems to be some sort of there's not two parallel lines here. You guys are both saying completely opposite things.
Mm-hmm. Sarah really well articulated at the very beginning of this discussion. In a society as free and tolerant as ours, that is so free market oriented, if you're an individual that is either at a genetic level or through socialization or both, that regardless of the legality of the substances around you, you may well be inclined to abuse them. And I would suggest the prohibition of the substances only make the abuse of those substances even worse. And so I think that it really does boil down to a biological level, which is why, about 95% of people can pretty well handle the moderate use of alcohol, but about 5% of people can't, and they will fall into an abuse pattern that almost all of us can readily recognize and would not ourselves want to fall into, or loved ones. So it really is a matter of trying to create policy for the vast majority of citizens who aren't prone to abuse, and those who do, that we have loving, caring, immediately responsive arms to take them in when they've decided, or there's been intervention in their lives, mainly through things like drunk driving or some other activity that has brought them to the attention of law enforcement, that they get proper, effective treatment. This surely does not happen by getting arrested and drawn into the criminal justice system proper. So a